So we're going to look at variable names and how we actually name variables as we're using them in our code. So let's just start off with an example. So say we've got a bit of code that says like C equals A plus B. Okay, we'll pretend it's C++. So we're taking A, adding it to B, and we're storing the result in C. So fine, it works, you compile it, perfectly good bit of code, nothing wrong with that. However, 3 months later you come back to it and you really won't be able to remember what A plus B actually means. It would be much better to say something like total value equals cost plus tax. So now we know that the result is actually going to be the total value of an item plus whatever its tax value is. So this makes the code far more easier to read. So anyone coming back trying to fix this code can easily see what's gone wrong. And it could even help you as you're writing the code as well. For instance, we could have realized that it doesn't want to actually be the cost. It could be the retail price. And that would have been far easier to know that you've got it wrong. You could have somehow forgotten that A wasn't the retail price and it should have been, it's not A, it should have been D instead. But D plus B, you're not going to easily sort of figure that out. So naming the variables can help with how the code is readable, how it's maintainable. It provides better meaning to the code. People get a better understanding of what your code's meant to do. So what are the sort of best practices we want to use, or what are the practices we want to use in order to be able to come up with these sorts of best ways for naming our variables? So there are a number of things we can look at. First of all, the length. How long is the variable name going to be? So we decided that A was not a good idea, or B was not a good idea, because they just really don't get enough meaning in there. However, if we take another sort of extreme that happens to be too long, for instance, let's say something like list of products in stock. Okay, it's quite descriptive, but can get quite long and difficult to type. So a better example for that could be something just like list of products, okay, or whatever fits your scenario. So the length of the variable is important. Don't forget that every time you want to use this variable, you're going to have to type it in. Some languages are better than others in that regard, where they will sort of predict and suggest which variables you actually mean, but others are not necessarily always that good. Now also, as variables or the names of variables generally do not allow the use of a space. So for instance, we could not really have a list with a space of space products. We couldn't have that because this would be taken as one word, this would be taken as a different word, this would be taken as a different word, rather than it being the whole thing together. So we can't put spaces between names of variables. Now, depending on which language you're using, you may be able to use a different character to a space between this. So for instance, you could have list and then an underscore of underscore products. So we've now replaced the space with an underscore. Now this is perfectly fine. Quite a few languages allow you to use the underscore. Some might even allow you to use other characters, for instance a hyphen. So it depends on the language that you're using, and you need to check that what's actually valid that you can use in this case. Another way of sort of doing this is instead of actually using a replacement for the spacebar or anything like that, we could actually use what's called camel case, and this is where we list the first letter of the word in uppercase. We don't leave a space, and then the next word begins with uppercase again, and then the next again. So as we can see that the L, the O and the P are both in uppercase. Okay, and there's no spaces between them. Okay, so it helps the name of the variable stand out, and it helps you to read the variable, especially when there's like multiple words within the variable name. Now there are other things we can do with the variable names. So there's a method of adding even more information to a variable name, which used to be used quite a lot but isn't necessarily anymore, and this is something called the Hungarian notation. So the Hungarian notation is a way of adding extra data to a variable name by prefixing the variable name with information about the type of data that the variable is storing. So for instance, let's say that we're storing integer data. Okay, so an integer data in a variable called, let's do age again then. Okay, so instead of just having int age, we would have int as being the variable type. We might I because it's an integer, and then age for the variable name. So the actual variable name would be age, given that the I would give us extra information about the variable type, given that it's an integer. And we would do other things. For instance, if we had a char data type, we were wanting to that, we might just put C in front of something. So let's say C name, or if we were doing, if it was meant to be a string, we might put something like str. Oops. Let's say rather than sit, that should be, just do it correctly. Okay, so we might put something like str name to tell us that it's a string. Other things as well, for instance, a floating point value, we might say f height, for instance. So this gives us extra information. So the other thing that we might actually do is also include information about the scope of the variable. So a variable might be visible by different parts of the language. So let's just do a little bit about scoping here. So we may have a global variable, and that will be seen inside the whole of the program. And a level down from that might be a module variable. Okay, now that will be seen by anything within this module, and a level below that would be a local variable, only seen by the local parts of the code. So anything that's declared as a global variable can be seen and changed by any of these levels underneath that. Anything that's declared at a local level can only be changed at that local level. So for instance, if we had a age variable at a global level, anything down here we could set age down here quite happily. If we had a variable down here though, for instance, let's just say name, okay, then that variable is not visible up here. There can also be a little bit of confusion. For instance, if we declared a variable here called age, and we also declared a variable here called age, then anything below or at this level would use this version of the age in here rather than this one. Okay, so that one wouldn't get used. So we have variables that we can store at different levels in the program, so a different scope. So what we've done at some points is actually have or use the name of the variable to sort of give some indication about what its scope is. So instead of actually, so we could do something like put G for global, M for module, and then local would just be age, like that. Also, it's possible to maybe think about putting globals in all uppercase. Okay, that would give us an idea that this variable is global. This can sometimes get confused with variables that we make constant. Now, unlike a variable, a constant variable is something that doesn't change, so they tend to often be put as uppercase.